Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Wonderful being here with you again. As we sail through to Sydney, the very first building you'll notice, the very first incredible structure, will be the Sydney Opera House, the World Heritage masterpiece of human creative genius. Jan Utzon, the Opera House architect, made the building well ahead of its time and also far ahead of available technology at the time. And his vision, his incredible vision, was not only to provide space for the performing arts, but also to elevate and celebrate them. And we are going to find everything about the Sydney Opera House this afternoon. My name is Nitza Lowenstein. I live in Sydney, Australia, about 10 kilometers up the road from the Sydney Opera House. I'm very lucky that I had the chance to be, I can't tell you how many times in my lifetime at the opera, the concert hall. So I'm very, very fortunate. I'm an historian, I'm a public speaker, a journalist, and also a married celebrant. It's wonderful to be here. So, I'm proudly presenting Sydney Opera House to you in Port Jackson, Sydney Harbour, New South Wales. It is considered one of the most famous and distinctive buildings in the whole world. As I said, the architect actually made the building well ahead of its time, and we'll find out that the technology wasn't really available and ready for what he had designed. So there were lots of challenges building the Sydney Opera House. So it is one of the most photographed buildings also in the world. I'm sure as we sail into Sydney, you'll take lots of photos and then you'll take more photos again. It is very well known for its distinctive sail-like roof and also its prominent position on Bennelong Point's a harbour side setting, which allows the building to be viewed from every angle, actually, and also from far away around the Sydney Harbour. And it is also very close to, look what's behind, the very iconic Sydney Harbour Bridge. So the best place to view the New Year's fireworks is actually to be at the Sydney Opera House. And the dream is to see a concert and then at midnight go and see the fireworks. So it was officially opened by Queen Elizabeth II on October 20th, 1973. October was 50 years ago. So in 2007, it was added to a UNESCO World Heritage List for a very good reason. Now, the construction of the building started in 1959 till 1973. And it was very complex, challenging process that took 14 years. And the original budget, ladies and gentlemen, you will probably laugh if I tell you, was $7 million. Right. Well, the final cost was $103 million. And let me tell you, in 2020, just a few years ago, it was updated, renovated at the cost of $300 million. So just let's put things in perspective. I don't know who was dreaming, planning a building like that for $7 million. So it is a very modern expressionist design with a series of large precast concrete shells. It's 75.2 radius, forming the roof structure. And it is supported by 588 concrete piers that were sunk 25 meters below sea level. And we see why it happened like that. So the highest roof point is 67 meters, about 22-story building. And it is made of 2,194 precast concrete sections that weigh about 15 tons each. I'm just giving you the idea of the weight, so wait and see why. And although the roof structure are referred as shells, they are precast concrete panels that are supported by precast concrete ribs. And they are not really shells in the structural sense. So though the shells appear uniformly white from a distance, I challenge you to go very close and look at it. You will be surprised that they actually feature a subtle chevron pattern, like a V pattern, and they are composed of well over 1 million tiles in 2 colors. That's what's so genius about it. You've got glossy white and matte cream. And they're manufactured by the Swedish Kohagenes AB, a company that was made actually especially by specification, those tiles. We'll talk about it in a minute. And you will find out that the architect went into a lot of trouble to find the right manufacturer for the tile that fit his vision. He had a special vision for the tile, even the combination of shiny and matte to get the special what you see, special reflection of the roof. And there is significant interior surface. It's not enough just to see the opera house on the outside. Ladies and gentlemen, go inside as well. And it's including all forms, spray concrete, Australian white birch plywood, supplied from New South Wales, and brush boxwood. Really beautiful inside as well, very modern. And the scale of the shells was chosen to reflect the internal height of the requirements for the concert hall and the opera house, and with low entrance spaces rising over the seating areas up to the high stage towers. And the smaller venues, the drama theater, there are smaller venues there, the playhouse and the studio are within the podium beneath the concert hall. And I'll show you those also the theater and the other rooms there. So the podium, which is really important, is surrounded by substantial open public places and or space, public space we call it, and the large stone-paved forecourt area with adjacent monumental steps is regularly used as a performance space. So they perform inside and also outside the Sydney Opera House. And we'll start with the concert hall. I just want to tell you what the end results before we go into the process of the building. We've got 2,679 seats, home of the Sydney Symphony Orchestra, and it's designed for orchestral and choral performances. And I absolutely love the concert hall. I've been to other concerts and it's just magnificent, and the acoustic, the sound, especially after they renovated it and they improved the sound. My last memory of the concert hall, when my mother-in-law turned 100, she loves, absolutely love classical music. I took her to the concert hall for a Mozart concert. And I think she was half deaf with all the hearing aids, but she actually followed the music and she was mesmerized. And I tell you, it's something you'll never forget, the pleasure on her face to sit there and listening. I don't know what she heard, Mozart music, but she knew it off by heart anyway. So the concert hall has also a grand organ, the largest organ in the world, with 10,000 pipes. And by the way, it took 10 years to construct it. Wasn't overnight. And the opera theater, named the John Sutherland Theater, got 1,507 seats, and it is the home of the Opera Australia and the Australian Ballet. And the Australian opera singer, Dame John Sutherland, is widely regarded as one of the greatest sopranos of all time. She was born in 1926, she passed away in 2010, so they renamed the Opera Hall after her name. And so after 2 years after she passed away, they renamed the John Sutherland Theatre, and her last performance was in October 1990. I was very fortunate to see her on stage. She was amazing. And I put an image of La Traviata. I've seen that production a few times, one of my favorite productions. I've seen other productions of La Traviata since, but that was really, really fantastic. I'm an opera lover, so and concert lover, but especially operas. And I was very lucky that in my job as a journalist, I was covering it also for radio. So I was very fortunate to be invited to almost every opening, and I really enjoyed it and appreciated it. So very, very fortunate. And the drama theatre's got 544 seats. It's used by the Sydney Theatre Company, very good theatre venue. The Playhouse Theatre is a smaller one, just under 400 seats, also very good venue. And the Studio Theatre, flexible space with 280 seats, and people, if you change the configuration, you can get 400 people there. Now, Utzon's room, it's a small multi-purpose venue for parties, corporate functions, and it was designed by Utzon himself in 2004. And I must tell you something really personal. In August, I was back in Sydney and I officiated the wedding right there. As you know, I'm a marriage celebrant, and that was amazing. And then we all went outside and on the steps of the Opera House and took photos as well. But it was really beautiful to have a wedding ceremony right there at the Utzon room. So the outdoors is, as I said, it's an open air venue with wide range of configuration options. And people ask me, Nitza, where should we go and eat in Sydney? Is there a really good restaurant? I said, well, you can get a good restaurant anywhere in the world, in Melbourne, in your hometown, you know where to go. But if you're in Sydney, it will be really fantastic to sit there outside the Opera House. There are lots of the restaurant and the coffee shop, and just drink champagne and absorb the atmosphere. And a lot of Sydney-siders go there, not just tourists, let me tell you. And that will be, I think, much more meaningful, and you'll remember it than just going to a random good restaurant. So other facilities, the Sydney Opera House, you've got recording studio, retail shops, cafes, a restaurant, very good restaurant inside the Sydney Opera House, and bars and the opera bar and opera kitchen. And guided tours are available, and if you want a guided tour, I suggest you book it online in advance. And beneath the Opera House, I mean, if we have any Aussies here or any Sydney-siders, they will know what I'm talking about. When I arrived to Sydney, we immigrated from South Africa, and we arrived to Sydney in November '77. The Sydney Opera House was quite new then. Think about it. And they didn't have parking. They didn't have a car park. Because for years, the process of the building, they didn't want to touch the botanical gardens. It may affect the trees above. And it was a huge debate where to put the car park. And how can you have a venue in Sydney without a car park? It's impossible. We had to actually go to the main car park, take a bus, and go back by bus. It's like amazing. So when they eventually came with the design for the car park, it was also so innovative and so original. So the Sydney Botanical Gardens, beneath the Botanical Gardens, you go and visit, you won't miss the Botanical Gardens. If you walk from the Sydney Opera House around behind the Botanical Gardens, lies a double helix donut-shaped concrete car park, sinking 12 floors underground. So, and there is a 7-meter soil and rock between it and the surface of the gardens. and it is 42 meters into the earth. So it's quite an experience driving into this car park. I don't think there is any other car park in the world like the Sydney Opera House car park. I mean, today, whenever I go there, I just parking, drive in, very easy. Now, the location is an incredible location. It's the Bennelong Point Peninsula, and a privileged place at the entrance of the Bay of Sydney. And it's like a headland on the south side of the harbour, just east, as I said, of the iconic harbour bridge. Now, Bennelong Point was always a place of ceremony and gathering and celebrations for Aboriginal Australians. So it traditionally was used as really an auspicious place. I'm going to have a whole talk about Aboriginal Australians, the first Australians, about their mythology, culture, not to be missed. And this is the second day when, after you've been to Sydney, so that will be Sunday afternoon, you have to get back to the cruise ship. So at 6:30, double check the schedule because it can be changed. But at the moment, I'm going to talk about Aboriginal Australians when you come back from Sydney. The second day we are in Sydney. So as I said, it was always an auspicious place before the Europeans arrived. The British landed in Sydney in 1788 in the area, and guess what they used that space? That was ideal to park the cattle and horses there. And so they call it even Cattle Point. It was named later after Bennelong, who was the very first native who learned English, and he was the liaison between the British and the local population. And his wife, by the way, her name is Barangaroo. So when you visit Sydney, you'll see Barangaroo is brand new area in Sydney, just built the last 5 years, and the new casino is there. Barangaroo was his wife. So the place is named after her. So in 1790, Governor Phillip built a brick hut for Bennelong, right on that point, and that became Bennelong Point. And there was Fort Macquarie was built there on Bennelong Point, but was demolished in 1902, and it was replaced by a tram shed. So they still didn't have a proper purpose for it. Now, we are getting, after the Second World War in Australia, there were so many calls to dedicate Performing Arts Centre in Sydney. We had huge immigration, especially from Europe, after the Second World War, and that's actually the newly optimistic nation was looking to define itself. It was a very important time after the Second World War for Sydney. And the famous English director and composer, his name is Eugene Gossens, he lobbied for a venue. He arrived to Sydney in 1946 to lead the symphony orchestra. And he was the one who inspired the idea of building an opera house because they really didn't have a venue. Unfortunately, lots of credit owed to him because he managed to convince the right people, but he left Australia in 1956 because of a sex scandal. But another key advocate, and I think Australians are forever grateful for this person, Joseph Cahill. He was a railway worker, blue-collar worker, and he entered politics, and he became the New South Wales Premier in 1952. So, as I said, we really have to thank his vision for our opera house. Cahill was a former Minister of Public Works, and he shared this Gossens' belief that all people, regardless of their class or their background, had the right to enjoy music. So he lobbied for it, the government agreed, and in 1955 the Opera House design competition was announced by Premier Joseph Cahill. There is a Cahill Expressway today, and a lot of Australians go Cahill Expressway forgot who was Cahill. So, and Bennelong Point was declared the site for the proposed new opera house. So, if you were an architect anywhere around the world, you could enter this competition. It was very prestigious. You received a 25-page booklet known as the Brown Book, and it had black and white photos of Bennelong Point. That's all what you got. And the competitors entered by paying a fee of 10 Australian pounds. So 4 judges were appointed, and it's really important who were the judges. I won't give you the name because it's too much information. Is also not so important, but you'll find out one judge was really important. So what you see on the screen in front of you is other entries for the Sydney Opera House. That's how the vision was there. You can see what people put in the competition, what they entered. In April 1956, architect Jan Utzon was working on his design. So in 1956, he just celebrated his 38th birthday, and he set to work in his modest office in a suburb of Copenhagen, was Danish, on his design for the competition. And he sent only 12 drawings to Sydney, and it was really just before the competition closed. Last minute was in December 56. His 12 drawings arrived. Now, Utzon was a sailor, so the shape of sails would be a major influence on his design, as you know. And he studied also something that I don't think the other architects paid much attention to it. He studied the location, the peninsula. And he knew the building built upon it would become a visual landmark. And he had a vision. He remembered the location of the castle of Kronborg in Denmark that also built on a prominent location. So he had the vision that it's going to be seen like the Kronborg castle. So to highlight his proposal, he used also podium steps. And ladies and gentlemen, he got his inspiration from South America, from Mayan pyramids in Chichen Itza in Mexico. He traveled in Central America, South America, to see what, not for this, before. He spent a year traveling when he was younger. So he always had the sails in his head, and he thought that those podiums I don't know if you ever been to Mexico, in Chichen Itza, he said that will be really nice to have in his design. And he was absolutely right. And that was the inspiration for the Sydney Opera's famous steps. So the proposal was based on a series of parabolic shells. Parabolic means curved shells in the shape of a banana, if you want to think about it. And they were united in a common axis. And it covered 3 buildings arranged on a platform or podium. And the progression of the domes give the complex a great drama and sculptural character, appearing in the distance as it was floating above the sea. So judging began, the closing date end of December, January 57. They started looking at all the designs they received, and Jan Utzon's design was number 218, one of the last. There were 223 entries, by the way, and from 28 countries. So what you see on the screen is one of his very early drawings that went into the competition. And you can already see the vision there. You can recognize the steps. In 1957, that's another of his drawings. the committee announced the winning entry of the Danish architect Jan Utzons. And he won with this dramatic design showing a complex of 2 main halls side by side facing out to the harbor on a large podium. And I just want to tell you something. And he came with an estimate cost of $7 million. That was, everybody had to bring an estimated cost. So the 4 judges, their judgment, I want to read what they say. They say, "We have returned again and again to the study of Utzon's drawings, and we are convinced that they present a concept of an opera house which is capable of becoming one of the great buildings of the world." Well, in retrospect, they were absolutely right. So Utzons won £5,000 for his design. But now I'm going to tell you a big secret. Not many Australians know about it. That when the judges, first thing they saw his design, they chucked it into the bin. Because they never seen anything like that, and they just couldn't digest something so modernistic and different. And the judge, Iiro Saarinen, he was a Finnish architect from Finland that worked in the US. He actually retrieved it from the garbage bin. And he said, gentlemen, just have a look at it again. It is so different from any other design. We have to evaluate it again. So that's how it was saved. So look at that. That's what they were thinking of initially. That was modernism, rejecting decorative motifs of the pre-Second World War. They wanted to move away. So a lot of the designs were just, this is one of them. You see, like glass boxes, and all the entrance to the entrance were like that. So his design, in contrast, was more sculptural and also embraced expressionism. And it's also the only entry that took a full use, making a full use of Bennelong Point, the whole point harbor side, and which would allow the building to be viewed from every angle, as I said. So let's find out who was the architect. Utzon was born in 1918 in Copenhagen, in Denmark, and he was the son of a naval architect. So as I said, he used to go on sailing boats, and when he was 12, he went with his parents to Stockholm International Exhibition, and he was transformed by the experience. It's quite amazing what the child of 12, the impression. And then the architecture of Gunnar Asplund, the champion of modernism, affected him, and also his parents. And he studied at the Royal Danish Academy of Fine Arts as a result of his family also interests of art. And he began his career working for some prominent architects in Denmark. And then he also had his own practice. He started his own practice in 1951. And in 1957 was his breakthrough. He won the international competition for his design for the Sydney Opera House. And when selecting the winning proposal, the jury had no idea how to execute the project. And therefore, after a few months, he made more detailed, Utzon made more detailed proposal with the support of a very good structural engineer, of an Arab, also Danish guy, and Willem Jordan in acoustic design. And to advance the execution of the work, it was decided to carry it in 3 stages. That was really clever, that they divided it into 3 stages: the base, the roof, and the interior. So it was planned that the architect would work on the design of the roof while the foundation and the podium were under construction. So they didn't have the full design before they started. So they just were going to follow it. So March the 2nd, 1959, work commenced at Sydney Opera House, and a crowd gathered under umbrellas in the rain to watch the ceremony that marked the start of the construction. And Utzon placed a bronze plaque with New South Wales Premier Joseph Cahill, and building immediately started. And the commencement was very significant for 60-year-old Joseph Cahill, the New South Wales Premier, who had done more than anyone to push the project. He faced a lot of opposition. The opposition objected to it. $7 million, where are we going to get $7 million? They were screaming and shouting. And he spent 2 years, it was 2 years since the design being selected, and he had to defend the expense and defend the idea of building such an expensive $7 million public building. And he said, in a young country like ours, we ought to be courageous. We should pledge the future if need be, urging both parties to look beyond the present. So he certainly had the vision. Now, if you think about it, most grand monuments around the world, and you are world travelers, you've been around, what do you see? A lot of buildings that really unbelievable, iconic buildings, they built in the name of religion. Temples, churches, basilicas, mosques, or as tombs. Or memorial, you know, the tombs, what do you think the pyramids are? Memorial for individuals. And the Sydney Opera House was a building built by the people for the people. So major problems confronted the engineers straight away. Stage one. Unfortunately, they just discovered that Bennelong Point wasn't as stable as they thought, and it was clay soil. There's a lot of clay soil in Sydney, not hard rock. And so they had to put 700 concrete poles. They embedded while water were dammed and pumped out. And that's already significantly increased the cost before they even started building anything. And mass concrete foundations filled the unstable rock in the central area of the site. And it already went beyond the $7 million. So they were faced with the second major problem. The weight of the roof was still unknown. Right. You know, when you build a building from the base up, you have an idea how much the roof will weigh, wouldn't you? Have you ever built a foundation for a building without knowing the weight of the structure? Well, the Sydney Opera House, one of them. Now, Premier Cahill was in a hurry. He didn't want another plan. He said, this is the plan. We are not changing the plan. Because he knew if they change the plan, it's his vision, it will never happen. So he wanted to succeed before any opposition will stop the project. Simple as that. So he was 68 when the construction began, but unfortunately 7 months later he fell ill at a meeting at Parliament House in Sydney, and he sadly passed away the next day. And from his deathbed he asked Norman Ryan, he was a former electrical engineer who was the Minister for Public Works. He said, do not let the Opera House project to fail. Do not let it fail. This is my legacy, please. So in 1963, January, well, the podium was completed. That's 10 years before completion. Stage one was completed. And the entire project was supposed to, that's the time frame that the entire project was supposed to be finished, only stage one. And 5 years after construction began. Stage two, 1961, Utzons devises spherical solution. For 10 years, the designers were experimenting with several alternatives for the concrete roofs. And the original idea was dangerous because if one collapsed, the others would follow. So they had to find out. So look in front of you, the extraordinary structure of the shells themselves represent a puzzle for engineers. In 61, Utzons came up with the perfect solution. He replaced the original elliptical shells with a design based on complex off sections of a sphere. And he said he was inspired by a simple act of peeling an orange. So the 14 shells of the building, if combined, would form a perfect sphere. So you can see his design. So one of the main challenges was figuring out how to construct the complex geometry of the shells. And one of the most significant innovation in this project was the use of precast concrete sections that were shaped to fit the shell's curves. And these sections were then lifted into place by cranes and fixed to the structure, which allowed for the shells to be constructed quickly and efficiently. So that was incredible innovation that made it go. And look at that. The roof composed of 10 shells, you can see in front of you. And going back to the tiles, he wanted the tiles to contrast with the deep blue of Sydney Harbour and the clear blues of the Australian sky. And the tiles needed to be gloss, but, ladies and gentlemen, gloss, but not mirror-like to cause a glare. So he found the perfect solution. He found exactly what he wanted in Japan. A durable clay tiles, resistance to weather and wear, with subtle coarseness caused by the granular texture in the clay. So if you go closer, you'll see what I'm showing you. And I'm sure you'll go closer to the Sydney Opera House, you'll see that. So the roof is covered by two types of mosaic, one glossy white, as I said, and the other one beige matte. And it would shine, but not be blinding. And millions of pieces of pottery were manufactured in Sweden and pre-assembled in modules before being placed. So this effect appears to give the building a smooth surface white, observing it from afar, and a texture while approaching near it. So we've got a sleek modern look, and you'll see what they use there. The roof today. Look at this image in front of you. I don't think Utzons knew about laser technology there. Nobody knew what we are using it today. So he said, Utzon always said that the tiles were a major item in the building, and it was important that such a large white sculpture in the harbor setting catches and mirrors the sky, and he didn't dream that the feature used laser lights on the tiles during Vivid Sydney Festival, when the Opera House is illuminated with spectacular digital work. If you go to Google it, put Sydney Festival, you'll see unbelievable designs on the Sydney Opera House. Every year, different designs. And in May 1965, the coalition defeats Labour. The new Premier, Robert Askin, and the Minister for Public Work were in conflict with Utzons over cost. They were refusing to pay the running costs. They said it's just like a bottomless pit. I mean, we have to add money all the time. So he was asked in 65, in December 65, he actually wanted funding to prototype the ceiling fix. And the minister, David Hughes, Minister of Public Works, he didn't approve it. He said, actually, he went to the engineer, the other Swedish engineer, Ovi Arup, to see if it is viable, the whole scheme was viable. And he wanted a detailed report before he gives more money. So in January 1966, Utzon's ceiling deemed not viable by the engineer that was his friend that worked too closely with him all the time. And Ove Arp gives his report to the government saying the Utzon's proposed plywood ceiling for the halls are not viable. And that led to deterioration between the architect and the engineer, and they never ever spoke to each other again. From good friends, they became enemies. So in February, 28th of February 1966, Utzon resigned from the Opera House project. He closed his Sydney office and vowed never to return to Australia. And ladies and gentlemen, he never did. He never seen the Opera House completed with his own eyes. And there was a public rally. You see the engineers rallying and architects. They wanted to reinstate him. And they signed a big petition. But Utzon was never invited back to the project. And he didn't want to see his vision compromised in any way. And especially didn't want to see his vision completed by other architects, other people. So when Utzon left, the shells were almost complete, and the cost already was 22.9 million. Remember, the final cost was 103, right? So following the major changes to the original plans for the interior, as I said, the cost rose to 103 million, reminding you the budget was 7 million. But I must say, something very important that people don't realize. It was not financed when the opposition started making a lot of noise about the cost and why the public, shouldn't come from public purse. They actually did a state lottery to finance the project. And the state lottery was very, very important and provided a lot of money for this project. And despite his resignation, his design was completed and officially opened in '73. Now, he is recognized and respected. And look, I mean, that's the Utzon's hall that I told you about. And he died in Copenhagen in the age of 19, 2008 of a heart attack. And as I said, he never came back to see his opera house. He was awarded the Order of Australia. He is recognized for his vision. So who completed the job? Another very important architect, also very clever, very talented, with incredible vision. And at the beginning, when they approached him, his name is Peter Hall. I think it's quite amazing that we have to thank him for the halls, and his name is Peter Hall. They asked him to complete the work, and he refused because he was one of those that sent the petition. But he realized that if he's not going to do it, I mean, they're going to go ahead anyway. So he actually put a lot of effort. So from 1966, Peter Hall was appointed to the project, and he was charged of the design, and David Littlemore managed the construction. Now, they really had to resolve a lot of problems. You can see his image on the screen. And in January '67, completion of stage 2 right in front of you. You can see that was with the installation of the last precast shell segment. And the work on the interior began, and that's where the problem started, what to do, how to do the interior. So stage 3 was huge challenges for the architects and the engineers involved, and the design of enclosing glass walls posed technical and architectural problems, and they were resolved with great ingenuity by Peter Hall and his talented team. And it was Utzon's vision that you can see the harbor from all the foyers. He didn't want a closed foyer. You must see the harbor, the water from everywhere. So the Sydney Opera House is 6,000 square meters of made-to-order glass, ordered from France, and 650 kilometers of cabling for electricity and electronics throughout. And in '66, Peter Hawley actually traveled the world, went to every single famous opera house to get inspiration and learn. And he designed with 2 halls. As he said, that the concert and opera were incompatible. You have to have 2 different halls, and you can't have both in the same hall. So we really have to thank him, because now we can have concerts and operas at the same time. So one of Hall's finest achievement, most significant challenge, was his concert hall. And he recommended the need for a concert hall for large symphony orchestra and another hall for a large-scale operas. And that's what we have. And there's a lot of other details, like the cooling system was very innovative all the time, uses seawater from the surrounding harbor. Peter Hall died young, unfortunately, at the age of 64 in '95, and he was also awarded a state honor after his death. Now, this is, I think, a very touching photo in front of you. You see that Jan Utzon's, and that's Jan Utzon's son, and Willie Hall, Peter's son's, outside the Sydney Opera House. So in '73, stage 3 completed at the cost of 80 million. Now the final bill was 103 million, took 14 years to build. And it was officially opened on the 20th of October 1973 by Queen Elizabeth II. And there was a lot of, Utzon didn't come, as you know, and there was a parade and a party. Unbelievable day for everyone that was in Sydney. And I'd like to quote the Queen. She's the late Queen. She said, "The human spirit must sometimes take wings or sails and create something that is not just utilitarian or commonplace." That sums it up, I think. And look at the celebration at the harbor. Anyone with a dinghy arrived there. Now, you can take, I'm not going to repeat it, you can take an image if you want. These are the stages, construction, the timeline. It's on the screen in front of you. There are 2 images if you want to take. And that's, again, that's the timeline. So I just want to finish by saying that every year the house hosts more than 3,000 events. And the building is kept in a high use. And you ask who is managing it, who it does belong to. It belongs to the people. There is an Opera House Trust, operates to maintain the building for the New South Wales government. And 10 members are appointed by the Governor of New South Wales for 3 years. So they want fresh people, new vision, and it's a building managed by the people, for the people. And it's gone through quite a few renovations since 1973. There was in the late 70s, the early 80s, under Peter Hall, he improved the acoustics. And also in the 1990s and 2000, more upgrade. And from 2016 to 2022, it went through a major renewal project in preparation for the 50th anniversary. I think COVID, because everything was dead in Sydney as well, they could really complete the renovations of the Sydney Opera House because there were no other performances there. And it remains a world-class venue for performing arts now for many years to go with the last renovations. Do you know how much it costs, by the way, this project, just to renovate it? $300 million. Put things in perspective. Now, how many people visit the Opera House? Well, 10 million people more than 10 million people walk through the Opera House, 7 venues and 1,000 rooms every year. And Vivid Sydney is an annual 3 weeks festival of light, music, and innovative ideas. May and June, if you come ever to Sydney, this is fabulous. And also, it's a projection of the Sydney Opera House and the Harbour Bridge, and now also the taller buildings in Sydney as well. So this is like from Vivid Sydney, just to show you, give you a taste of that. I don't think, as I said, Utzon didn't dream about that. And ladies and gentlemen, as we celebrate the 50th anniversary of the Sydney Opera House, we know that the value of the Opera House is absolutely priceless. I came with funny figures, right? But it is priceless, in the billions. It's the best investment of public money for the future generations as well. This is, by the way, this is Chinese New Year. So it's not just Vivid Sydney, right? And other architects said that Utzon's made a building well ahead of its time, far ahead of available technology, and it preserved through extraordinary malicious publicity and negative criticism to build a building that changed the image of an entire country. It's not just the image of Sydney, it's the Australian image as well, as a country. And the Opera House, as I said, it's a World Heritage masterpiece of human creative genius. And I think that's why we appreciate it. And Australians are very grateful for the vision and daring of previous generations. Thank you so much for your time today, and enjoy visiting the Sydney Opera House.